everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining. We're going to get started right on time to save as much of our time as possible for your questions. My name is Karishma Furtado, and I am so happy to be with you all this afternoon and to share this opportunity with you. I'm going to introduce more of the team in a moment, but first wanted to run through some light housekeeping. First off, this event is being recorded, and we will be sure to share the recording online afterwards. Second, you can hide captions or adjust settings using the live transcript button on your screen. Third, should you care to know more about any of today's speakers, you are able to find more information about us on the events page at urban.org. Fourth, as you've probably noticed, participants are muted because there will be many of us here today, which is a wonderful thing. To manage that size of the crowd, though, we're going to ask that you type your questions and comments into the Q&A box that you should see, and we will make sure that we get to them at the end of our time together today. And finally, if you'd like, you are able to engage with us online using the hashtag #live@urban. Continuing on, here is what we will be covering today. I'm going to take us through some background on SUNY, followed by an explanation of key mobility concepts. And then my colleague Maggie will share more about the 2025 funding opportunity and application process. Finally, we'll get to your questions, which of course, again, you are encouraged to add to the Q&A box along the way. Various members of the team will be collecting and curating those so that we can make most efficient and effective use of the Q&A 15 to 20 minutes or so at the end. Bottom line, we are very excited to be in this moment. Our new RFP is live, and we anticipate awarding up to $3 million in total awards. We're going to talk through all of this in greater detail, but the essentials are these. You will need to submit a mandatory LOI by October 10th. A subset of those LOIs will be invited to submit a full proposal, which will be due by January 6th. And to help you determine whether to submit an LOI, we offer an option to share a 1-paragraph pitch with us for quick feedback, and the deadline for that is September 19th. All told, we expect to fund projects between the $50K to $500,000 range, with most falling under the $350,000 mark. Those will include those budgets will include a 15% indirect rate cap, and projects are allowed to be up to 24 months in length. Now let's zoom out. Let me give you a little bit more context about SUNY. Education is often characterized as this springboard to lifelong success, but as so much evidence demonstrates, that linkage is broken for many students, including and especially those coming from backgrounds of economic disadvantage and other forms of marginalization. Strengthening that education to lifelong success linkage requires knowing the answers to questions like, what skills and competencies that schools can help grow actually drive economic success and mobility? We have a normative set of answers to that question. So, for example, students should be able to read and write and do some math, as well as the perspectives of our communities, what employers tell us they find to be most valuable, and those lists tend to have some similarity. They agree in some ways, but not all. But in terms of what has been borne out by the evidence, our knowledge tends to be fairly thin, especially when we try to understand how the predictive strength of those skills and competencies compares to the role of contextual factors, or even more complexly, how those contextual factors shape skills and competencies. And in the absence of this information, we tend to use in state accountability systems and college and career readiness indicator panels, for example, measures of experiences and credentials, which are important, but often have shortcomings. SUNY is motivated by the idea that if we had more skills-based measures of things that are proven to matter, then system stakeholders, be they state education policymakers, governors, school district leaders, workforce development strategists, and so on, would be better able to intervene and build responsive education systems that promote long-term success. There are many efforts to reform and transform our education system underway these days. Some have been at work in some form or the other for a while, from high school redesign efforts to competency-based education to career-connected learning. And we think many of them would benefit from this type of skills-focused insight that SUNY aims to produce for the field. So our goal is to build an education to economic mobility research field so that schools, policymakers, and program designers can prioritize the skills and competencies that promote the upward mobility of students, especially those, again, from backgrounds of economic disadvantage. And we actualize this goal in 4 basic ways. First, we work to identify the pre-K-12 skills and competencies that drive economic mobility. Second, we develop and improve measures of those mobility drivers. And for those first 2 circles here, the primary way we do that is by funding research from people like you and your colleagues. We're not necessarily doing this work ourselves. We're uplifting the many of you who are doing versions of it in your own spaces. Third, we invest in data assets that catalyze new research, because part of why we don't already have answers to these education to upward mobility questions is because they're really challenging. You know, we're talking about an outcome that's separated from the K-12, pre-K-12 period of time by decades, and that is influenced by what's happening not just in the education sector, but what's happening in neighborhoods and communities and the job sector and healthcare. And so we need ultimately to ask the most sophisticated and nuanced and thoughtful of these questions. We need longitudinal cross-systems, cross-sector data, which is hard to come by. And finally, the 4th way we contribute to and actualize our goal is by sharing what we're learning about the drivers of mobility, as well as how to act on those insights in the process of working to develop new ones as well. So building this field of researchers and beyond. This is the team of us that works to do that within the SUNY core space. Maggie and I co-lead SUNY and benefit from tremendous support from our team, including Eden, our project manager, Rachel, our data asset manager, Emily, our engagement coordinator, and Kristen, Todd, Reka, and David, who all provide different forms of advisement. But we're lucky as well to be guided by even more folks than that. We have an advisory council who are leaders and luminaries in various corners of the education to upward mobility policy, practice, and research spaces. And again, we're very lucky to benefit from their input too. And we're grateful as well for the collective of funders that support SUNY, including the Walton Family Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Joyce Foundation, the Overdeck Family Foundation, and our fiscal sponsor, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Okay, with that big picture background on SUNY and its goals, we want to help increase the odds of your success with the RFP by sharing how we think about key mobility concepts that are really the foundation of the RFP. First, we endorse a comprehensive definition of upward mobility. So this means not only economic success, which might be the first thing that comes to mind, so as measured by wages or income, for example, but also power and autonomy. So namely, do people have control over their lives? Can they make choices and exert influence over the policies and actions that affect their future? And third, dignity and belonging. The sense that comes from contributing to one's family, work, and community and feeling valued for those contributions. So this holistic definition comes from the upward mobility framework, and we really think encompasses all that economic mobility entails. We like to underscore the mobility piece here. We are looking for improvement in one's well-being from childhood into adulthood, which implies a focus on those who start in a place of economic disadvantage. So we try to apply that lens pretty clearly when we're evaluating proposals. This ability to understand what this evolution and one's economic outcomes looks like, especially for those coming from economic disadvantage. So we care less about, can we get kids at the 75th percentile in terms of economic background as students into the 85th percentile, for example. We prioritize skills and competencies, a term you've probably heard me say several times now, over credentials and experiences. So, for example, demonstrated math skills and knowledge, as opposed to completion of a specific math course. We know that delineation between experiences and credentials and skills and competencies is not crisp, especially when we factor in the imprecise ways that we have of measuring things. And that's really part of the problem state that we aim to improve upon, even if imperfectly and incompletely. We think of individual skills and competencies as existing within these 5 somewhat overlapping, not mutually exclusive categories of academic skills and knowledge, health and well-being, career preparation skills and competencies, social capital skills and competencies, and then cognitive, social, and emotional skills and competencies. Finally, we are very clear for ourselves and for our funded projects that we can't aim to identify the skills and competencies that drive success in a vacuum from the messy context that students face. We know that a student and their family could do a lot of things right. They could study hard, they could take the right classes to develop the most useful skills, they could complete a quality internship, and still not experience the success that they aim for because of barriers that lie beyond them. We think of these broad contextual factors as affecting student success in school and beyond in at least 3 general ways. First, factors outside of school, like housing instability and food insecurity, can shape a student's readiness to learn. Second, factors like funding can affect schools and school systems' ability to function well for all students. And third, factors like bias in the hiring process or a lack of opportunities in one's local job market can affect the degree to which students see a return on their success in school. The RFP says more about all of these key concepts, and Maggie here in a moment is going to say more as well through the context of the specific foci and priorities of our current RFP. But we also have these additional resources on the field resources page of our website, as well as our blog. So we encourage you to check those out if you'd like to just get even more texture on how we think about these concepts and how you might be able to embed them in your own thinking for your response to the RFP. If you have any questions about any of these core concepts or anything else I've covered, please drop them in the Q&A box. But for now, I'm going to hand the baton over to Maggie.
Thanks, Krishma. So as Krishma mentioned, I'm going to dig a little bit more into the 2025 RFP. So our 2025 RFP focuses on the skills and competencies in late high school that propel students into economic mobility, and the ways in which the skill development and access to opportunities earlier in high school and in middle school shape those trajectories. And as Krishma mentioned, we think this is really timely and useful. We just finished about a year's engagement with the National Governors Association, where state leaders and governors told us very directly that they need better measures at the end of high school that tell them if students are really ready to be successful in their lives, in their communities, in their state economies. And we hope to fill some of this gap through great ideas you guys will bring to us. And, with all the action in high school redesign and career-connected learning, competency-based education, those efforts will really benefit from additional evidence base about what we're really aiming toward here. We're particularly interested in applicants answering some big topics. These are topics such as what skills and competencies do high schoolers need to be on track for upward mobility? Which skills are necessary for all the mobility boosting next steps out of high school versus which are key for maybe particular paths such as college, career, and the military? Which skills developed during middle school show continued development through high school, and by what mechanisms? To what degree do these development trajectories vary by students' characteristics, and why? And how do school structures, such as options for different types of coursework, tutoring, other tracking ways, factor in? So we expect grantees will work on these large topic areas to develop new measures of skills and competencies, to validate existing mobility drivers, or a combination of both. I'm going to go over this in more detail. So track 1 is our measure development track. So here we're interested in applicants developing new and improved measures of skills and competencies. We're primarily interested in measures in the cognitive, social, and emotional category, which you may know as social emotional skills, soft skills. We previously called them non-cognitive skills. A lot of field leaders are calling them durable skills now. No one seems to like the same term, but we're going to call them cognitive, social, and emotional for now. And again, as Krishma mentioned, we have lots of definitions and examples of these types of skills in our field resources. Alongside those skills that we're interested in new and improved measures of, we're also interested in social capital measures and career preparedness measures. For measure development, we're interested, of course, in the late high school space, but also in the middle to high school transition and earlier in high school. Here, we really want applicants to focus on how new measures can be scalable and usable in schools in the future. And we want to, think about this. We could envision this being scalable because these measures are embedded in existing technology assessment platforms, other existing data that's already collected in schools or soon will be collected in schools. Or if you see other ways you think these data will be scalable, we'd be happy to hear that as well. And I'll come back to an example of this in a moment. Track 2 projects are identifying and validating mobility drivers. So by this, we mean we want to link measures of high school skills and competencies to adult mobility outcomes, or examine the relative weight of the contextual and structural factors and explain those outcomes as compared to or in addition to individual skills. So here we're thinking of linked or longitudinal data that can be used to help us understand what's really driving economic mobility. The kind of buckets we're most interested in here for the second track are skills and competencies, again, in the cognitive, social, and emotional space and social capital. We're also interested in expanding what we know about academic sub-skills, which could include knowledge. Here, we're going to be more narrowly focused on high school and especially late high school. And we very much know that earlier skill development and trajectories matter here, as well as clusters of skills. So those might be features of proposed projects that would be really compelling. We're also interested in getting more causal estimates, if there are ways to do that, of the role of skills and competencies, which can be tricky to think about. So I'll weave that into an example in just a moment. So track 1, and I'm going to provide some examples here that are by no means like the sole applications we want to see, but rather to help you kind of hear the wording we've been using in an example that's a bit more concrete. So for track 1 of measure development, we could envision using AI or maybe other technology, other methodology to determine if question-taking patterns in one of the many adaptive educational technology platforms that your kids, my kids, and most students now use can measure self-management, let's say, as well as existing instruments that may not be scaled or used widely in schools. We'd be interested if this is different for students who are in well versus poorly funded schools, or for students who have different baseline levels of knowledge. So some ways we'd see this as in scope is that there's a clear skill or competency identified that matches our area of interest. So it's not just saying we're going to examine, cognitive or social and emotional skills. It really drills down into a specific skill. Something else that would be important here is really making sure this is in the high school or middle to high school space. And we would like and already see some evidence that the applicant is already considering how context matters for the development and maybe the importance of these skills. We also could get a sense that there's some scalability here or the possibility of it because it would be using existing technology platforms, so it wouldn't be asking schools to administer yet another assessment. And I think what's really important is that we'd want to hear from the applicant how this new measure of self-management is both theoretically linked to economic mobility, as well as how it would improve existing measures, existing validated kind of instruments of self-management. That would help us really know, is this worthwhile to investigate and then maybe scale in the future. An example of a Track 2 project or a driver validation example. So one example would be looking at the degree to which SAT or ACT detailed data, or maybe subscore data, predict adult success at age 30, and how that predictiveness compares to that of composite scores, where we already have some research already. So we'd really want to understand how, any of these drivers might be different for different types of students. Maybe one way to look at that would be examining these drivers for all students versus students starting at or near poverty. You can see from this example, the applicant would need to clearly identify which academic subskills they're going to examine and why. We'd want to hear why this is an improvement on the research that the field already has access to. And we would envision wanting the applicant to really further define economic mobility, both for the student and adult outcomes. So by that, I mean, how are you going to measure that students are at or near poverty, or some other measure that you want to use to define where students are starting? And then how are you going to measure that their outcomes have changed in adulthood? We, again, provide a lot of resources on what we've learned on how to do this well on our website, but we also welcome new ideas there. We also would want to make sure that individuals and context is considered, and we see some evidence there, but maybe there might be other obvious things, such as access to test prep that could clearly influence student scores. Beyond these measure development and validation projects, we also know that some projects will cross boundaries. So we do accept hybrid projects across these streams. Hybrid example, again, meaning part measure development and part driver validation, could be to develop a measure of network mobilization skills, which is a form of social capital that then could be used to, examine how predictive that is of adult outcomes for students with different degrees of access to neighborhood and high school social capital, and among students maybe who are more or less civically engaged or more or less engaged in extracurricular activities. So in addition to what you see on the screen in terms of how this might align with the criteria we would be looking for, I would note that we really want to be we would really like the clear description of student skills in terms of network mobilization versus just saying access to social capital. We'd also really push to see how this would matter for students in different contexts, and also understand how the applicants thought that schools could reasonably influence the development of these skills. So again, these examples are just meant to be illustrative, and we encourage you to review the RFP that's on our website now for all the details. I'm going to say some things that you've probably heard Karishma say, you've probably heard me say, and we're saying them once again because we think they're important for successful applications. So again, we want to focus on skills and competencies that are malleable by schools as opposed to credentials and experiences. We have lots of write-ups about what we mean here and examples on our blog and in our field resources. We also need applicants to struggle and show in their methodology how they are going to consider the intersection of skills and competencies and students' context, because these things do not happen in isolation. So this isn't just telling us conceptually how you might think of students' context, but actually how you will operationalize that. We can also, especially, and this kind of notes back to what I said about more causal research, we can envision that some studies or some proposals might be focused on interventions or programs, but I want to be pretty clear about what might be in versus out here. So, if you're thinking of a program evaluation or intervention that might be, you think have good data and theoretically linked to economic mobility, we'd really push you to think about getting beneath the black box of the intervention and the outcomes related to participation in that, and focus on the skills that the intervention is aiming to improve and how you might measure that. We also are pushing to have some out of the box ideas. So if you think maybe this doesn't, fit in, but I think it's really important for students' upward mobility, please send us the idea. We really want to get a bit outside the box here with some of the grants we fund this round. At the same time that we're pushing for new and creative ideas, we really also want to make sure that people are thinking about the scalability of these ideas now or in the near future. So one way to think about this is, in the future, after the research is complete, how might a policymaker use the eventual findings? What would be the top line that you were trying to communicate to them? And why would these measures be more useful to them than what they already have access to? We also want to remind you that this is an upward mobility initiative. So we want to think again about how students who are starting their education toward the lower end of the income distribution, how that changes for them over their life course and how you will precisely define them. So now I'm going to turn a bit more to the nitty-gritty of the application details that Karishma previewed. And I'm happy to talk more about some substantive questions in the Q&A. So as you know, our RFP is now open and on our website. And again, we're accepting proposals for projects between 50 and 500,000, inclusive of the 15% indirect. That can be up to 24 months in duration, but also can be shorter. This is a two-stage application, and letters of intent are mandatory, while full proposals will be invited. Before LOIs are due in October, however, I will note that we already have a simple portal open to accept one-paragraph pitches, and those are already coming in, maybe from some of you. This has been open since we launched 2 weeks ago, and will continue to be open for a little bit longer through September 19th. So this is a unique opportunity for you to send us a clear paragraph and a few other details to fill out, and for us to provide you some direction about how we think your idea aligns with our RFP. We've heard from our current set of grantees that when we did this last round, it was really, really helpful because it allows us the chance to help pull out places that we know we would have feedback on and to give you a shot. It also might help you if you're not sure if your idea fits or not, to not waste your time writing a longer LOI if you're able to get that feedback earlier. So this paragraph pitch is not mandatory, but I do highly suggest it. And of course, the earlier you get that to us, the more time you will have to have that feedback as you draft the LOI. So as you see on the timeline, the LOIs are due at 5 p.m. Eastern on October 10th. Applicants will hear from us about a month later on or around November 11th, and that will indicate whether you are invited for a full proposal or not. Full proposals will be due at 5 p.m. on January 6th, 2026, and we anticipate making final decisions in early February and having projects start in March. And while the RFP site isn't open, the LOI application site is also available on our website, and a preview of exactly what you will need for the LOI and LOI and full application are all listed in tables in the RFP. If for any reason any of these times or dates change, we will update that on our website. So as we review the LOIs and RFPs, we'll be keeping these principles in mind. So initiative alignment, this may be pretty obvious, but we want to make sure each application is aligned with our initiative, that tracks some priority areas within the RFP, and really it advances the field. Feasibility and rigor. We want these R&D projects to be successful, and we want to hear how your data, team, plans, strategies will ensure completion and success. As we run this initiative, it's really fun because usually all of us are on the other side of writing research proposals and conducting the research. It also means we have a keen eye for the ways in which these things may be glossed over. And so really appreciate you telling us up front what you think will make your project successful and where your challenges might be. We also want to make sure that your methodology will withstand the highest professional standards, and the details of those may be slightly different across fields, and that's welcomed. One note about feasibility is that letters of support or data sharing agreements are going to be expected at the full proposal stage. You are welcome to include those earlier in your applications, but that's not necessary. I mentioned ingenuity earlier. We really want to advance the field by getting the best ideas out there about novel research questions, innovative methods, measures, data and technology that really move the needle about what we know about the education to economic mobility link. And one thing I do suggest in addition to all the research sources on our website is to take a look at the current grantees we fund, just to have a sense of things we may not be exactly duplicating in this round. And actionability. As we mentioned earlier, we want to make sure this research can be scaled quickly and that we can build consensus around new measures that are developed. So we encourage you to reference a lot of the field guides we can. We also are excited about building a field of researchers. So that means representing proposals that represent different perspectives and experiences, such as place and discipline. We also welcome ideas, for how you want to stay involved with SUMI, even if you don't end up submitting an application, because we really want to strengthen what we know about each other's work. Okay. About done here, and then we'll turn to your questions. As far as next steps, all of the most up-to-date information will always be on our website, and we hope you will check that as you work on the different components of your application. If you're also not already signed up to get our blog posts and other insights as they're published, you can sign up. There's a banner at the top of our website. You will hear insights from our current cohort of grantees and their findings, as well as other leaders in the field. Of course, we want you to apply if you think you have a great idea, and happy for you to share this with your networks as well. And again, we want to make sure that we get the best pool of ideas possible, but also that we honor your time. So we encourage you to submit those optional one-paragraph ideas by September 9th. After this event, you will receive an email with links to the materials, and also a short survey, which we hope you will complete to make sure that our webinars are useful in the future. Okay, with that, I will invite Krishma back on screen and we will start the Q&A. And we have lots of time, so please enter any questions you have.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. I'll kick us off. We have a question asking about whether studies focused on students with disabilities would be within bounds. And I'm paraphrasing here. The full question, of course, is in the Q&A panel. Short answer, yes, we think students with disabilities are an important group whose mobility trajectories merit understanding. And you can check out our current grantees actually for a couple of projects that look at the experiences of students with disabilities to get a flavor for how we're currently investing in that population. There's, of course, more work to be done there. Maggie, pass it back to you.
Yeah. Got a question if applicants can submit more than one LOI. The answer to that is yes. Most likely we wouldn't fund more than one project, per team, but you're welcome to submit more than one. I will also note that you can also submit more than one paragraph pitch. We won't be re-reviewing paragraph pitches after we provide feedback, but you're welcome to submit more than one. Krishma?
If you want grantees to use adult measures of economic mobility or success using existing available data, this means that the independent variables or skills would need to have been measured years earlier. But you're saying these skills measures don't exist. Can you say more about the longitudinal data expectations? Yes. Track 1 projects, measure development projects, are not expected to connect measures to outcomes. So there's that, exactly because the data linkages may not be possible for a new measure. That being said, hybrid projects are possible, and obviously track 2 projects as well. Within that hybrid project space, if you're studying something that is in need of measure development or measure improvement, some ways we've seen this done is looking at early adulthood outcomes, which we would encourage you to provide some reasoning for why those outcomes seem like reasonable proxies or surrogates for longer term outcomes. So for example, wages at age 25, or attending and graduating from a mobility boosting college. And we have a bit more explanation and texture on ways we think about operationalizing mobility outcomes within the RFP. You should check that out. But those are ways you could imagine, like pulling the outcome a little bit closer in time to the period of measurement. But another way we've seen current grantees live with this tension is by thinking creatively about where the data for new and improved measurement comes from. It might not be primary data collection. It might be repurposing data that has already been collected and that might have a new and novel measurement purposes. So for example, using metadata to measure executive functioning, or using item level data to develop a measure of critical thinking. Because those assessments have already been administered, it's more possible to sort of go back in time for the skills and competency measurement piece so that you can collect more contemporary outcome measure connected that way. And finally, for measures that are so underdeveloped that what the field needs is just a strong measure of this cognitive skill or competency. Like, yeah, the track 2 project might not be super possible right now. That's a big part of why we have the measure development track alone. Thank you, back to you.
I'll follow up with a maybe somewhat related question. Can we use high school outcomes as primary outcomes if research indicates that such measures are strong predictors of economic mobility success later on, such as STEM post-secondary aspirations? So for track 2 projects, high school outcomes would not be sufficient. We would really need adult outcomes there. If you are more on the measure development side, which Karishma indicated, then again, having that theoretical link would be strong enough. I think the interesting thing to probe here is, what's really being added to the field. So if we know that STEM post-secondary aspirations have some indication, I don't know that particular research well, or linked to economic success, then what are the skills that might drive that relationship, and how could you have data that uses those skills to establish that link, or understanding the other factors or pathways that might influence that relationship as well. Karishma?
Can the measurements proposed before a specific field, if it is still related to upward mobility, for example, teacher education? So I'll say this, and then please follow up in the Q&A panel if I'm not really fully understanding the question. We're most focused on the student level skills and competencies that drive adult success. So if a project wants to examine how those potential drivers are produced, so the role of teachers with varying degrees of professional training or education, that would need to be a secondary focus alongside that primary focus on what are the skills and competencies that drive mobility, or that we're trying to develop and measure. So again, follow up in the Q&A panel if I didn't quite understand the question correctly.
Another question is, would this RFP entertain out-of-school programming and its impact on upward mobility for 9th through 12th graders? So this is a little bit different than our first RFP. We are more open to out-of-school contexts, but I would again push for not just attending an out-of-school program, but do you have data from that out-of-school program that shows specific skill development? So not just maybe exposure to a career fair, but some measure of skills or competencies that were developed during that career fair, or something like that. I would also be interested in an application that looks at out of school to tie it to how to hear how an applicant thinks schools can influence this. Obviously, schools don't happen only within those short hours they have the students and within those walls, but we do need to bound it some ways in which the education context can kind of develop those skills, and so would be interested in hearing more about that link as well.
A couple questions are getting at methodologies. So in our nonprofit, we have several staff with university-based research experience, but we're not officially affiliated with a specific institute of higher education. How does the SUNY team think about methodologies that are more community-based or emergent and design-based? And then a second question related around research partnerships with charter commissions and co-designing the survey. Those community partnered methods are perfectly appropriate, assuming the right research questions. So they're definitely within bounds, and there are several examples of current grantees that are using a mixed methods approach and varying degrees of community embedded approaches, especially in the methods development, or the measurement development rather, track, but not only in that track, but in the measure development space, we've seen some really compelling suggestions or proposals to use community-based methods to help design and iterate on and eventually start to test the new measure. So that would be appropriate, assuming it's aligned well with the research question.
I'll follow up on a technical or eligibility question, which is if proposals are from the same organization that have different key personnel, would we be likely to fund those? So we don't have any restrictions on just funding one project per organization. We also, want to make sure that all applicants have a great opportunity to apply. So the projects will be judged on the merits of the projects themselves, and all those kind of principles and all of that are in the RFP, but no restrictions.
My next one is a circle back to the students with disabilities question at the top. I'm referring to the students in the question are not technically in grade 12, they're in post-secondary training, but still in public school. So do they fall in bounds? And the answer is yes. Feel free to proceed if it all seems aligned and of interest. But eligibility wise, yes, that would be no.
I have a question about more toward the end of the project, thinking about how do we envision findings and impact coming out. Are grantees expected to publish peer-reviewed findings? So we have a list of kind of grantee expectations at the end of the RFP, and I'll highlight some of those. So we do require a publication that is either peer-reviewed or a policy-oriented brief or something like that by the end of the grant, regardless of findings. We also, and you won't have a ton of space for this in an LOI, but in the RFP, if you're invited, we'll have more space, are really, really interested in how you might be able to share findings throughout the project. So how might you inform the field before 2 years is over, or even later for a peer-reviewed article is really important to us because there's such a need and eagerness for results in the field. So that could be things like presentations to policymaker audiences, or briefs, or being interested in writing a blog or things like that. And these are places where SUNY leans in to help translate and synthesize findings. But if your team is competent to do those sorts of activities, or you have partnerships where that would make sense, that would really strengthen an application, but isn't a total requirement. But to emphasize the actual requirement, yes, you do have to publish something by the end, but peer review is not the only type of publication, although we would expect the quality of such to be able to withstand peer review.
It can take 6 to 8 years for skills to translate into economic outcomes in labor market mobility, and early labor market indicators don't tend to be particularly strong predictors. With that in mind, how would you think about using older longitudinal data sets? We're open to using older longitudinal data sets. There's one grantee that I'm thinking of right now that is using an existing and slightly older longitudinal data set. I think we've entertained some around using the NSLY 97. I think key would be to be studying something that you think hasn't markedly evolved, such that the measurement and assessment that was done historically is we have good reason to think no longer generalized or applicable in the current day. So that would be the general caveat, but I think lots of things like measuring some of the more academic sub-skills, for example, could be fairly reliably measured in more historic data sets.
There was a question about some examples of academic sub-skills, and I think we might have some of this in one of our blogs. But for instance, one way to think about this are particular types of math skills. So are skills related to algebraic thinking different than geometric reasoning, or data analysis, or different things like that? And how do those matter differently for students' long-term trajectories? Another way to think about it is thinking about the content knowledge versus the kind of skills of applying that knowledge, which maybe in some tests versus others, but really across different types of subject-specific assessments, or more summative or optional assessments across math, language arts, science, civics, other subjects. just kind of narrowing down. So we're not just saying math matters, but we're saying, if students have a limited time and really need to focus in on specific skills, for instance, are there specific ones that seem to matter most? And do those matter for all students? Do they matter for all pathways, et cetera?
I appreciate the distinction you are drawing between experiences and skills, but that distinction seems blurry in the case of social capital. Can you say a little bit about what you're imagining in terms of measuring social capital as a skill? Yes, I think it's generous of you to say that it might only be blurry between in the social capital space. I think there's some blurriness across all the categories of mobility outcomes, but within the social capital space, some of the skills that are on our mind include network mobilization skills, social capital literacy, career connected network building skills, overcoming help seeking aversion. And we describe those in greater detail in the appendix of the RFP, where there's a table of skills and competencies by category that we're particularly interested in. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a starting point of it.
So question if we will have preference for studies with a broad geographic sample, or if focusing on one large school district would be sufficient. So this is not a simple answer. I think maybe we'd be interested in both types. Across either, we'd be interested in how the results you have might be generalizable to other contexts or not. Or maybe how, let's say it's a measure development project, or maybe using a more localized assessment that doesn't exist in other places. What are the kind of the feasibility of that mattering in the long term, or scaling if it does seem to matter. So we have several examples from our current grantees where an urban district, or maybe a series of urban districts or rural districts are used as the sample, and that's totally fine. We also have a number of projects that are statewide or national survey data, and so that will probably be shown in our next set of applicants again, where we do want differences across place. So we're not going to fund all of our studies in one state, for instance, but for your application, you don't necessarily need to worry about that, as long as you kind of speak to scalability and how context does or doesn't influence what the meaning making you can take from your results.
And I'll just connect that to a comment that someone made in response to the social capital point, that they are a statewide serving organization and would be able to look at statewide student aggregate data. That's great. We have several examples of current grantees that are using, for example, state longitudinal data systems to, for the left hand, right hand, or both sides of their SUNY projects. So that sounds generally aligned. I'm going to move to another question. Is there a core literature or set review or seminal references that we should consult about predictors for economic mobility? Yes-ish. There's our own research synthesis, which is not a systematic review or meta-analysis, but does some of what you are describing, and certainly will point you to lots of other literature and give you a sense of what our thinking is on the state of play here. We'll drop the link to that in the chat. You can also, in looking at how we've put together some of these other resources, get a sense of who we're turning to as we build out our set of likely mobility drivers that we're most interested in learning more about. We named some of the frameworks, for example, that are out there that you could also dig into if you were interested. But I would start with that research synthesis.
One question we've gotten is who will be reviewing these applications? So the SUNY team will be reviewing the one paragraph ideas and also the LOIs. So that includes, Karishma and myself, but also other members of the SUNY team. For the RFP, we also will be expanding our network to include external reviewers. So that may not be for every single project, depending on what the subject matter is and how that matches our skill sets versus additional insights we need. But you can expect that your application may go, if you're invited to the full application, to some external reviewers. Throughout this process, we ask and have forms available for you to know any potential conflicts of interest with our team, with our advisory council, and we'll also check in with any external reviewers. Any relationship does not preclude you from applying or disadvantage you in any way. It's rather to ensure we have a fair process so we can ensure that everyone's review is kind of done in the same way and with folks who have the same level of information. Karishma?
Yeah, there's a quick mention of an example of looking at student state test score results and the relationship between those scores and economic mobility. Yes, that generally sort of fits within a type of project that Sumi would be interested in, that would encourage you to look beyond aggregate scores or like summative scores to understand more about the specific skills and competencies. So looking at sub scores, detail scores, to get a handle on that.
Great. And these are amazing questions. If you, several of the questions ask about more examples, I think this link that was just posted will be helpful there. As we mentioned, these slides and recording will be available online along with all our materials that are on our website. If your question didn't get answered, you can assume that we will answer it via updated FAQ, in the coming week or so. Or if you feel that your question is a bit more specific to your project, the one paragraph pitch idea is the best and easiest way to get responses from us. Those will come on a rolling basis. And the first set will start coming out later this week. And if it feels more a little bit different than that, you can always reach us at Sumi, SUMI @urban.org.
And if I could just add to that list, if you're looking for even more examples, all of our current grantees are described on our webpage, and the current RFP isn't identical to the first RFP, but it does bear a strong resemblance, especially in terms of the 2 tracks. So you can take a look at what we have currently funded. You could even take a look at the old RFP and see how it compares to the current RFP and how the current examples fit into the new focus that we have.
That's great. So if you have more questions, always email us. We're really, really excited to see your project ideas. Again, you'll get an email from us with a survey as well after the event. And we really appreciate your attendance and participation today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.